Hola a todos, creo que ya estamos. Sí, creo que sí. Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidos una vez más aquí a nuestra Cambly Talks o nuestras live sessions de Cambly. Vamos a empezar una vez más haciendo estas conversaciones un poco informales, hablando un poco de todo. Hoy os hablo de una ciudad muy especial. Estoy en Barcelona, yo vivo en Madrid, como ya sabéis, pero estoy haciendo una visita a mis padres, entonces estoy en esta linda ciudad de Barcelona. Si hay alguien de Barcelona, ponga aquí al lado en los comentarios para que podamos hacer un hola a todos. Y bueno, bienvenidos, yo soy Tiago, estamos aquí otra vez en Cambly. Antes de nada, os quiero decir que tenemos una promoción súper especial, una vez más, ¿vale? Haciendo aquí, si queréis, podéis echar un vistazo. Aquí abajo en la descripción hay un enlace donde hemos puesto el descuento de hasta un 35%, pero entonces, muy bueno. Si queréis aprovechar, tomar una clase gratis con este descuento, con este código, está ahí abajo, solo ponerlo y aprovechar. Si queréis también echar un vistazo y tener una clase con nuestro tutor de hoy, que algunos de vosotros ya conocéis, otros no, pero ya en un instante vamos a conocerlo un poco mejor. Pero si queréis tomar una clase con él, aquí abajo también os he puesto la descripción y con el enlace para el tutor de hoy también. Y hoy vamos a hablar de un tema sobre la cultura de Estados Unidos, ¿vale? Algo que, como el arte ha influenciado muchos de la cultura en general. Y bueno, vamos a hablar un poco de la historia. Bueno, ya sabréis que es algo bastante interesante, ¿vale? Si tenéis preguntas, ya sabéis, poner aquí al lado, poner un like, cualquier cosa que queráis preguntar, estamos aquí, ¿vale? Será todo en inglés y ahora vamos a cambiar y empezar todo en inglés. Entonces, cualquier cosa por el lado en español también no pasa nada, ¿vale? Bueno, let's go to English. And hi Guy, one more time. How are you? How's everything going?
I'm doing great. Everything's going good, man. Thank you. How is everything with you?
Very nice, very nice. I'm very happy doing some visiting my parents in Barcelona. So it's a beautiful city. I love here. So I was kind of missing the beach. So amazing, and I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good.
Yeah,
So
awesome.
before we start, I would like one more time, as I said, that a lot of people already know you. We already did a lot of Cambly talks or live sessions. I don't know what we can call this. But for the ones who are new here, don't know you yet, can you introduce yourself, tell a little bit about you, your background, and well, whatever you think it's most important?
Sure. Hello, everyone watching at home. For those who have never met me before, my name is Gui Moraes. I am a tutor on Cambly, and I am also a tattoo artist and a fine artist. I lived in Miami for most of my life, although I was born in Rio de Janeiro. I have dual citizenship, so I am Brazilian American. And I went to school in Miami at New World School of the Arts. So today's topic is very, very fitting. Something that I suggested to Tiago because it's entertaining and it's fun, and it is a big part of culture in general and English language. Um, so I have a degree, a bachelor's in painting and drawing, and a minor's in art history, which hopefully won't fail me too much today as I try to recall some of American art history. And yeah, so everyone watching, I hope you participate, send us questions, comments, and make sure you use the link with the promotions and come take a few classes with me.
Yeah, definitely. As I said, these code we are offering not just a promotion general, but it has a free class on this promotion, these codes. So just make sure to click in the link below, and then you can have a class with him. So guys, enjoy that, and I think it will be pretty nice for all of you. And well, now going a little bit into the topic, and so what as you said, you gave me this idea, this topic to talk about, and it's super interesting. It's super different in some way, and sometimes people don't necessarily think about art as a way of even shaping the culture in general. So I would like to ask you a few things. What do you like to start with, and what can you say a little bit about art in general for us in the U.S.?
Awesome. You bring up a very good point, which I would like to add on to, and maybe we can start from there.
All right.
How many people don't realize how much art is alive and how much it is a meaningful pursuit or a way to have a career or something that you can actually follow if it is something like your passion or desire. When I was growing up, I was not aware of all the art that is happening and all the infrastructure and market and everything else that comes with it. You know, I knew there were plays, so I knew theater. Of course, we all consume music, so I knew that this type of art, but this other type of like more cultural or visual arts, as we see in museums and galleries, to me, to my naive mind growing up, it was very much a historical thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we know Picasso, Da Vinci, it was very much like to me something that was dead, I guess, something historical, I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
aware of contemporary artists and everything that is so fresh and new that is around us. So
Mm-hmm.
that is very interesting. Maybe that's why it's also a good topic to bring awareness to people how much it is alive and happening, not just in America, but in the whole world. Art is a very viable way of living.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
true.
what really made that kind of obvious was during this pandemic, especially the early quarantine all over the world where it was very restrict. People couldn't leave their house at all. Depending on where you live, you'd still like that, but maybe it's already, a little loosened up. But a lot of people started consuming a lot of entertainment from home because we couldn't leave. And so we had live, music shows, a lot of artists sharing each other's work, and a lot of movies, just music, movies, this type of art that comes to us more as a form of entertainment. And it really showed its value, like how much it's a big part of our lives. And we don't so much pay attention to that. Like we consume a lot of entertainment, but
Mm-hmm.
we kind of take it for granted. And it's kind of hard to see how much effort and hard work it's put into create all that entertainment, all that art that we consume.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big part of society. And since we had talked about sports and we talked about going to school in America and we talked about a little bit of everything, the pandemic, I was like, what haven't we talked about that is also something crucial and a big part? And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, well, arts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And something that you have a lot of
so
experience with.
yeah, I only really became aware of it because I initially went to school for graphic design. Because in my mind, graphic design was a way that you could be creative, which was something I knew I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that you could also have a pretty career path, like pretty established or pretty standard, right? As an engineer, architect, or if you work with IT, all these sort of conventional jobs and careers
Mm-hmm.
have a pretty standard format. And I guess graphic design to some extent fit into that. You have a salary and you have an office that you work and you have clients, and it's pretty organized and stable. And so I thought that was the most creative outlet like that any person could have today as a job and a career.
Mm-hmm.
And I started studying graphic design at Palm Beach State College in Lake Worth, Florida. And early on, as part of the requirements, you have to pick your electives. And I had teachers suggesting me, hey, why don't you take some electives in some more academic classes, like studio classes. And I always enjoyed drawing, so I thought, sure, I'll check those out. And I started taking drawing classes and painting classes in this college. And that's when I had teachers who were actual artists who showed and were represented, but who were
Mm-hmm.
also teaching. They started showing me more of this side of art that is very much alive and I wasn't aware of. You know, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, wait a minute, this is actually something that exists and it's viable. You know, like someone could be a practicing artist in this day and time,
Mm-hmm.
and that was so interesting. Pretty romantic view of the world, I guess, that you're going to be, you know, living out of your studio, painting these creations in your
Mm-hmm.
mind, and people are going to get to enjoy them. And I just thought it was almost like magic.
Mm-hmm.
And so after I finished my graphic design course, I had more, I guess, studio and fine art classes than I had graphic design classes. I had
Mm-hmm.
more credits for that. And I thought, okay, then I guess I'll just pursue this 100%. That's when I went to New World, which is a very like established and academic fine art school, you know. And I switched over to painting,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when the whole world opened up. So I started going to galleries all the time, art talks, you know, collections and Art Basel and other types of like art fairs, and started researching and studying a lot of art history and collaborating with other artists and participating in critiques, and started becoming aware of like all the conceptual side of art that lives today, which is something very philosophical and critical that I never even knew existed, you know. And it's like this whole parallel world just opened up in front of me, and it's fascinating, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And it's a big part of culture and society, whether we realize it or not, because things in culture kind of sip towards other things. You know, things that are happening in music are influencing things that are happening in architecture, which is, you know,
Mm-hmm.
infiltrating in theater, and it's playing a part in movies and TV shows and painting and sculpture. All these things are always communicating, and they also help forming fashion, and you know, like so much of it influences our daily lives, and we aren't aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty fascinating. But before all of that, I was completely ignorant to it. You know, so it is kind of something that if you don't seek it or if you don't
Yeah.
stumble across it somehow, you are kind of like not aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's also why it's important to bring attention to it, because it's out there, it's available, and it's great. You know, it really enhances your experience, whatever you live. There's so much to do. Here in Rio de Janeiro, I think there is some things that are artistic, but it's not very much a cultural city because it's so hot and there's so much like nature and other types of
Mm-hmm.
available entertainment that people gravitate more towards those as opposed to like cultural kind of activities. And it's
Mm-hmm.
a shame because you could really do both. You could have it all, you know. So I don't know. Now I just went on a parallel
Uh-huh.
conversation,
No, but yeah, but definitely it's
but
something that it's definitely true. And when you said when you said that it's something that we are not actually aware of, and most of us actually think it as like when we go. I would put my perspective in here in Europe. So here in Europe, we
mm-hmm,
see it art. Most of what the people think is that art is something, as you said, that it's already dead. So it's from someone who is not around us anymore. So you go from these huge museums, if you're like in Paris, and you go to Louvre, and you see those amazing pieces of art, but you put it in your mind that it's something actually very old, or it's something that it's, I don't know. You start switching that into something more contemporary. So when you start going to these small galleries and go into these little streets or some neighborhoods that are very like artistic in some way, and but most
right,
of the people, as you said, is still with that mindset that it's arts in general is something very old or something very already dead. So that's a very
right,
interesting topic that you brought us here. And it's something actually when we think about fine arts in general, I consider myself a little bit actually like I don't know much about it. So when I think about fine arts, for example, I already saw here that we have some people asking about fine arts, and I would just pick here that I just saw that Maria de Lourdes, she just put it that I thought he could talk about fine arts because it's an important topic, and he wanted to know your opinion about that. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think? And because I thought it's amazing, this perspective of already something old, or people don't bring it to the contemporary. So I don't know. What's your opinion on that and on fine arts in general?
Right. So fine arts, what is its purpose, right? And what is art? I mean, there are some philosophical questions about art that we could talk about all day and they wouldn't be answered. They have been tried to be answered since, Plato and Socrates. And they're complicated questions, right? What is art and what is aesthetic? What is beauty? So there
Mm-hmm.
are some philosophical questions that we could definitely discuss. I don't think we would arrive at a final answer.
Yeah.
But the role of fine arts, right? So from my perspective, art, like we said, it's very much alive. We do tend to think about it as something historical, as something like a relic. Um, but the role of fine arts, I guess, is to promote dialogue, to question paradigms, or to enhance them. But it's basically always a critical view of the world that we're living in comparison to our history, in comparison to the times that we are living now, and also trying to imagine and shape a future, right? That
Mm-hmm.
has always been the discourse of fine arts. Whereas it's different than commercial art, or let's say graphic design or advertising or any other type of art, which kind of serves a purpose of a message for a product or for a specific intention or purpose, right? It could be
Mm-hmm.
propaganda, it could be something for the government, it could be something institutional, or it could be something like design where you're trying to create a message and deliver a message about a product for commercial use, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where design and art kind of split because you could have both using very similar mediums. There's nothing that defines that art is a sculpture of ceramic and graphic design is a poster printed on a printer. There's nothing that really separates that, right? And Warhol, great fine artist, came from a design and advertising background, and he used a lot of what we call new media at the time to make fine arts. So that was already a crossover. So what is the difference, right? So I think that the artists have more of this role of contemplating, first of all, the world that we live in
Mm-hmm.
and asking questions. There is a pursuit that is more theoretical, it's more critical and philosophical than just simply conveying a message, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and these types of discourses, these questions, they help push forward the way that we view ourselves, the way that we view our traditions, the way that we view censorship, the way that we can reimagine and shape a future. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very much a critical part of society in
Mm-hmm.
these ideas of thought and custom and morality,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that is all accompanied by a visual element, right? Which is, I guess, the art piece that we actually see, and that could be a painting, that could be a sculpture, it
Mm-hmm.
could be theater, music, right? But it's not so much only for entertainment or to deliver a message for a product or a client, but it's way much more than that. It's to enrich someone's experience of life and to make someone question their own existence or certain aspects about being a human being today
Mm-hmm.
or something historical. And of course, this is like a huge umbrella that has many fields. So you have artists who are more focused on aesthetic experience. So it's way more about a visual experience, and that's fine.
Uh-huh.
And then you have artists who might be more activists, and they are way more engaged in critiquing certain political moments and movements and intentions of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So this is more activist art. You could have more, sensorial art where it's more participatory, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's like an umbrella full of different fields, and I guess different people with different interests and purposes, they're going to fill in those gaps accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
So art in general, it's something very broad for us to narrow down into one
Yeah.
thing. What is it?
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
in general sense, it is a pursuit, and it has something to do with dialogue and pushing forward these ideas of context of the world that we live in today in comparison or contrast with the world that we used to be,
Hmm.
and how we can reimagine or question the world that is to become.
Uh-huh. Wow, interesting. Very interesting. I love that idea actually. And it comes to I
Yeah.
just saw an interesting question here as well from Paco. Paco just asked us something actually very interesting. And he put it, do you see any difference in the way people understand art between the US or Europe or other countries? That's interesting.
Probably. I can speak only from my experience. I think Europe is a far older continent as far as comes like with the modern civilizations that we know today. So art was, pretty much developed there, like this European art. And of course, we have to differentiate things. Okay, so in
Mm-hmm.
America, the history of art, we can start talking about post-colonization. So these were portrait painters and historical painters that were mostly Europeans coming to United States and bringing that school of academic painting to the new continent, right? So they're
Mm-hmm.
coming from Renaissance painting, they're coming from, this school of realistic painting. But, it's kind of flawed to say that because before Europe came to America, there was a lot of native art going on, right? Navajo, you have all these tribes that make beautiful art,
Mm-hmm.
totem poles and headdresses, and it goes on and on, textile patterns.
Uh-huh.
So really, so if we are already considering that there are all these different types of art, not just the European art, which unfortunately is what we get most exposure to, and is what when we study art history, the most part is focused on that European art, right? So coming from like Michelangelo and Da Vinci all the way to today's artists. Okay. Um, why? I don't know. I guess because this is what kind of cemented Western art, and it's the biggest part of culture that is consumed worldwide today, to this
Mm-hmm.
day. But there is African art, there is Asian art, Eastern art, Brazilian art, there is native tribal art. There's like a billion types of different, and then these different types of art forms have different contexts, of course. So everything I said about the contemporary art, this is a very, it is true, but this is contemporary art as the world, as a modern society knows today. So if you're looking at art from a native tribe perspective, maybe none of that is important. And all it really is might be some form of spiritual protection or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, rituals of passage of rite and rituals of someone coming of age. And it's just a part of their tribal life.
Mm-hmm.
Has nothing to do with these other types of questions that
Uh-huh.
Western art are asking. So
Yeah.
so to Marco's question, which is great, we can answer it in two different frontiers. One is that there are many different types of arts and ways of and perspectives of thinking about art with these very different cultures. That's
Mm-hmm.
one answer. Other answer is looking at art as I guess we are discussing today, which is like you said, the art that you will see at MoMA or at the Louvre
Mm-hmm.
or the Metropolitan, the art that is consumed by not just Western, because that has kind of englobed the whole world, but this type of contemporary art. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we can call it that way. There are great Chinese artists, Ai Weiwei. There's artists from all over the world. But this contemporary art, yes, people will look at it differently, and they will have different perspectives and pursuits because the artist deals with the world that he knows, the context that he lives in, and the questions that surround him. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're living in a very capitalist country, very driven by technology, you have one reality. If you're living in a very remote country that has a lot of censorship and it's socialist, you already have a different perspective, different questions, different issues that you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have different influences, different exposure to artists around you. You have different materials that you work with. So for sure, it's very different. But between America and Europe themselves, I think it's very much in conversation constantly, you know,
Mm.
because American art kind of started with European art
Uh-huh.
coming to America,
Yeah.
right? When it was colonized, the first American painters, they were actually European painters who
Mm-hmm.
moved to America, this new colony, and they were making portrait paintings mostly, which then later led into like a lot of landscape paintings and historical paintings,
Mm-hmm.
right? Paintings of like history and how the colonial life was developing. And then many years later, when the American Revolution started taking place, there was a big demand for patriotic art, patriotic painting, which is something very interesting about United States, and it's something that is very prominent to this day. America is a very, very patriotic country,
Yeah.
especially in the arts and the way that
Mm.
people display flags in their car, they have
Yeah.
flags in their windows, the national anthem, 4th of July,
That's true. Yeah.
even in tattooing, which is my field today, American traditional tattooing with a lot of Americana themes. It's something that is very strong.
Mm-hmm.
So within the visual arts and arts themselves, you know, you can see in movies how many World War movies they have, and movies, you know, like really talking about their history and the revolution. So it's something that is very popular and very sacred almost in American culture, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it comes even from those times. So that became a huge demand and very popular for artists to start portraying America in this greater sense of like we are now an independent country, or we're fighting to be an independent country,
Uh-huh.
and that's very so that kind of started segueing a little bit from Europe, but a lot of American artists would go to Europe and vice versa, and that went on for a few years. And after First World War, I guess you could say, even before that, a lot of European artists started coming to America to flee the war, right?
Mm-hmm.
The First World War was crazy. A lot of people dying, and a lot of great, great, great artists from Europe died during the World Wars. It's pretty crazy. They had very short careers because they died in the field.
Wow. Yeah.
A lot of them fled and came to America, and a lot of these great European artists actually came to America and started teaching in schools. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and then in 1913, if I'm not mistaken, you had the Armory Show in New York City, which was a big show of a lot of European art that was happening at the time, which was like, you know, the top tier of European art. And that started, I guess, influencing this big prominence of European driven art here in America as far as contemporary art goes, or like these art movements.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, also, a lot of Americans started becoming more wealthy, and they started collecting European art, and they started showing that art. And this started kind of the museum culture in America. So now people not only made paintings, but people collected them and they exposed them. So the general public started becoming more aware of it. And that went on and on and on. And then, you know, the history goes on. But so there was a huge influence of this European art. Europe after Second World War was pretty torn apart, and this kind of opened the doors for America, which kind of looked like the savior of the world after Second World War because they went
Mm-hmm.
in there, you know, D-Day, we know everything that happened. So America naturally started becoming like a big place in the world, almost like a capital of the world, where before it was London and Paris, you know, like cultural capitals.
Mm-hmm.
Now New York City was like the mecca, especially in the art world and fashion. So a lot of things started coming from Europe, and now eyes were actually placed in New York as a place of new things to come,
Mm-hmm.
which eventually led to the American abstract expressionist movement, which I guess is kind of like what marks mostly the American, like first American actual art movement,
Uh-huh.
which was a big, you know, a big take from all the representational art that was happening before that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of cool stories about that, and like FBI funding the abstract expressionist art movement
Wow.
because they wanted, you know, they wanted to really polarize and make America great again, or not great again. This is the new slogan. Great. They wanted. There's so much to talk about. The context is crazy, you know.
Uh-huh.
But
Wow.
they wanted America to seem as like this new country of freedom and revolution and like the new mecca of the world, right? The new like central downtown of the world. And so they wanted art to have something that started in the United States, not an European trend, something that started in the United States to kind of become the world trend, you know? So there was a lot of push for that. And the abstract expressionism was a way to represent that. You know, it wasn't something literal. It wasn't something that was grounded in academic painting, which is a European school of painting and thought. It was something that was freeing and open to interpretation, you know, completely abstract. And that kind of represented this new world, this new country where freedom happened and you were free to think and walk around and be what you wanted to be, the American dream, you know.
That's
so
nice.
It was kind of like a propaganda for the new American way of living.
Yeah,
it worked.
It worked. Yeah. So interesting how they used.
You know,
what?
A lot of these artists in the American abstract expressionist movement were actually European, you know, with European influence. You had Franz Klein, you had like so many Saitwam, you had all these artists that had come from Europe or had parents from Europe, and they kind of actually helped boom that movement.
Wow.
Wow. So yeah, the history is pretty great.
Amazing. It's actually very interesting to see how a lot of Europeans like brought this idea of a lot of different things into the world. So it's interesting. And as you were saying, it kept me. One of the things that came to my mind when you were saying about, especially when you talked about New York, and when I think it's something that maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so when someone talked to me about art in the United States, I can think generally like in three main cities. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I can think about when people say arts and United States came to my mind: New York and Los Angeles and Miami. So those three cities came to my mind. I don't know because maybe in I already have been in those three, so any of those have different types of art. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I saw that in New York. I went to a very interesting museums and galleries. It was very interesting, very nice. And Los Angeles, they have something different as well. I went to a very interesting gallery there. And Miami was something that I already actually I saw here. Someone was asking about the graffiti district and all those expressions of art in Miami, in the graffiti and all of that. So I'm right or wrong? What is your idea or thoughts about the parts or the cities that came to my mind? Because as I said, for me, when I think about United States and art came to my mind, those three cities is the first things that I came to my mind. So you can correct me if I'm wrong or tell your opinion about that.
Right. I think those are the three main cities for arts, I guess.
And let me just see here, because I just saw that it's when the question about the graffiti district in Miami came from Gabriela. So Gabriela, thank you for your question.
Yeah. So yeah, the graffiti district. I don't know exactly if it's called that or where exactly that is, but I have a good idea of what you guys are talking about. It's probably the Wynwood district.
Yeah,
or the
definitely.
Design district.
Yes, it is.
So I lived on Wynwood for a year on 2nd Street in North Miami, which is like the exact road where like Art Walk happened, where like the graffiti walls are, you know, the Wynwood walls. I lived like a block from Wynwood walls for a year. That's where my studio was, and that's where I lived in my studio.
Wow, amazing.
And yeah, so it's a big art movement. There's a big art place. There's a lot of graffiti in Miami for sure. It kind of all came from New York and Philadelphia and around there. But there is a big influence of art in Miami and LA, I would say. It's probably New York, LA, then Miami. Those are the top three, in my opinion. But Chicago has a huge influence of art. Boston has a huge influence of art. Atlanta, anywhere you go. Because the thing is, America is super well developed all throughout, So every state that you go to will have like three at least main cities that are huge.
Yeah.
They're like huge cities. It's not like, well, I don't know. I don't want to make comparisons, but you can go to any state and there's going to be like, a metropolis.
Yeah.
And in that, there's going to be a fine art museum. There's going to be a modern museum. There's going to be like an ICA, which is an Institute of Contemporary Art. There's going to be a nice, very good top level art school. It has that infrastructure any state that you go to. So there's a lot of arts everywhere, but maybe not to the same extent as New York, I would say. New York is something out of this world, and I guess you could compare it to like London or Paris, like these places also are pretty out of this world. If you go to Italy, there's a lot, but it tends to be a little more historical, but you go to Florence, it's amazing the amount of art they have there.
Yeah.
Everywhere you go. In Europe, there's a lot. Germany is crazy. Berlin,
Yes.
I've had the chance to travel to a lot of these countries and cities, and it's amazing the volume of art they have. Amsterdam, and it's great. But New York is pretty much it's huge, and there's so much going on that I would say maybe it's the Mecca. And for theater as well, of course, you have Broadway.
Yeah.
You have the Metropolitan.
Yeah.
Maybe the top 3 museums in the world of most important. But you go to Washington, D.C., they have the Smithsonian museums, which are great, and they're all free, and it's amazing. Everyone should go. They always have great shows. But in New York, in a small little area, you have Metropolitan, you have MoMA, you have Whitney, you have the Guggenheim, and it goes on and on. All these smaller museums and so many galleries. You have Soho, you have like all these different cities. And there's art everywhere. There's galleries everywhere, good and bad. It's just so much culture in New York in general, for food, for theater, for music. It's amazing, And why that is, I guess it's just the history of the place attracts that crowd, over years. It doesn't happen overnight. But Miami, there's a lot of art. It's great, it's a great city. It moves around a bit. So there's this pattern. I don't even know if this is really the topic that we're discussing, but it does come with art, and it's gentrification, which is something pretty serious. And a lot of artists who are more political will talk about this and make work about this. And it's the sense that, in general, practicing artists don't have much money. Okay? Yeah, we see the very rich, artists on TV, and we think it's glamorous, but that's kind of like being a rock and roll star. It's 1 in 1,000. The general artist population is pretty broke. And it's okay, it comes with the job. But what happens is you work for most of the year without really getting paid. And then you maybe show your work once a year, and you're hoping to sell some work to make that money back. So what happens throughout the year, you need a place that is cheap to live and work. So artists tend to find these little neighborhoods that are very cheap. So you can have like a little warehouse or something and turn that into your practicing studio, right? That's where you sculpt, that's where you paint, that's where you draw. And these tend to be in poor parts of the city, right? Poor neighborhoods. So you have like, let's say 10 emerging or good artists who rent warehouses in this little poor part of the neighborhood. And because of that, they start attracting attention to that part of the neighborhood. And maybe a gallery opens up to show their work. And the gallery starts bringing more attention. People who invest in art are usually wealthy people, right? These are the people who have money to collect and consume art, which is a big contrast, and we can talk about that in a different class. But so the artists who are living in this poor area, which is very cheap, unfortunately and naturally start bringing a gallery with it, and they bring a collector with it. And they start, seeing more street art connected to it. And then the street art sort of becomes this bohemian atmosphere. So a new cafe will open up and a design store. So things slowly start changing from a poor neighborhood into like this cool city, It's like, oh man, it is kind of poor and it's a little sketchy, but there's something cool about it. It has this different atmosphere. You start having like bands and music coming to play in the street. And next thing you know, it's like this very kind of like alternative, cool vibe to that city, And that's when it's a sweet spot. That's perfect because it's still cheap, it's not really famous or cliche, so only kind of like the art crowd is really going there, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's great. But then after that, these big galleries and big cafes and big stores start seeing that it's a hype place and it's cool, and they start investing in there, and then it starts like blowing up. And if it's starting to blow up, then the retail goes up, the property cost goes up, the rent goes up. So next thing you know, it's not a poor part of the neighborhood anymore. Now it's
Mm-hmm.
like a very cool kind of like niche part of the city that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of actually getting expensive to live in.
Yeah.
And what happens, all these people who love art start going there because there's live music and there's Wynwood walls and there's these great galleries and art walks and these cool stores and there's like this cool cafe and these bars and pubs and shows and concerts and electronic music. It turns into like this really hype place, which is great for the general public, right? But what really happens is the artists who went there because it was cheap, they can no
Mm-hmm.
longer stay there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're $200 for your studio, and now it's like 2,000.
Uh-huh.
You're like, oh man, now I gotta get out. And
Mm-hmm.
not only the artist has to get out, but all like the poor people and families who used to live in that neighborhood, they also can't afford it anymore.
Uh-huh.
So they all have to move out.
So.
So it's a side effect of art, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not all good. And this happens in Brazil. This happens in the United States. It happens everywhere. You know, you have Soho as an example, and then you went to Chelsea. And
Yeah.
in Miami, you have Wynwood. Wynwood is a very poor neighborhood, and now it's like this super hype place with great cafes and
Mm-hmm.
designer stores,
Wow.
and
Wow.
it changes like the landscape of the city. Yeah, so it's pretty crazy. I know it's
Mm-hmm.
completely off topic,
Uh-huh. No, but
but it
it's
happens.
related to arts in general, and I think yes. So I think it's a very
Yep.
very good example about that as well. Yes, and I'm trying to think about here in Europe. Actually, I live in a neighborhood in Madrid that is kind of like that. It's becoming a thing because it's in that moment where it's people know the place for being like this alternative vibe. So I think it's in the kind of going up in some way. All the things you start to see a lot
Yeah.
of vintage stores, design stores, and you can see a lot of different kind of interesting places to go, some bars. And for someone who don't know Madrid, for example, I live in Malasaña. It's the name of the neighborhood, and it's a super nice neighborhood. It's definitely worth going there. So, and you will see a lot of vintage stores, design stores, and all these interesting places to visit. And you see some paintings on some walls, and it's super nice. So I think I'm connecting what you just said to where we like where I'm living now. So it's kind of like that. So interesting to realize and
Right.
put it into perspective
Yeah,
of what you
because
just connect.
the city, like, let's say it was a city that didn't have much going on as far as cultural presence, right? And these artists who are small, but they're young and they're hungry and they're making all these new, fresh things happen, right? They're kind of like the the boiling point of like
Mm-hmm.
new art and what is like new. They go to the city, so the city becomes very live and active, you know. And but by the time that that reaches the general public, who are not so much connected, you're not in that tight group, you're not in that niche. By the
Mm-hmm.
time a regular person finds out about that city and it's like, oh wait, that's a great city, like an
Mm-hmm.
hour from here that has a lot of art. By the time these
Yeah.
people get to it, those young, fresh artists have already moved on. And what is left
Yeah.
there are bigger corporations or big galleries or big cafes who have kind of taken possession of the image and livelihood that that city created and fomented, and now they're kind of living off of that image. And you know, it's still a city that has all those things,
Mm-hmm.
but it's no
Yeah.
longer like those fresh young artists who are really making it happen. You know, now
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like just an afterlife of that.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Yeah.
you want to get to the real raw stuff, now you have to figure out where those young artists have moved on to. And
Mm-hmm.
it's an endless cycle, you know.
Yeah.
And it happened a lot in Miami, you know,
Mm-hmm.
before Wynwood, you know, but like Overtown, then to Wynwood, and then to Little Haiti, and it just keeps moving around.
Mm-hmm.
And So it's a big discussion because for one point it's good if you're into retail or you're like
Yeah.
kind of reviving areas of the
Yes,
city
definitely,
that were
definitely.
forgotten and abandoned. But then there's the negative aspect is the families that live in those places, which is the only place they can afford to live. You're kind of pushing them out. You're
Mm-hmm.
forcing them out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
So they're like these two sides to the coin.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting.
That's nice. Yeah, yeah. It's something that we have to think about. And since we're talking about that, I would like to. I'm already seeing that we coming through close to our 50 minutes, so I would like to ask you one last question that it actually came from. I think this live is so interesting that people from even from Cambly are just sending me messages to ask you. So I think it's an
Sure.
interesting place. So Flora, she just asked. So Flora, it's a co-work here with us, and she sent me a message to ask you because she wanted to know if you could recommend like a must places with your experience. Could be cities or galleries, or even if you wanted to put it into, I don't know, if you wanted to put it into one United States and one in Europe, I don't know. But she wanted to know, like,
Sure.
recommend places, like must go places for someone that is interested in arts in general. So could be galleries or places or cities, or in your experience, what it's like some must goes to visit.
Okay. Number one, New York for sure. Um, yeah.
What
I
is
would
the
say
most, what in New York, what was the most interesting place? It was like one of the museums or one gallery in specific, like.
it's a play. I don't know if it still happens. Okay, I'll type
Mm-hmm.
it here for you. I don't know if it still happens, but it's called Sleep No More. And
Mm-hmm.
this has been the most impactful, interesting artistic experience that I've ever been part of by
Wow.
far.
In New York.
If you, yeah, if anyone ever goes to New York, I don't know if this theater production is still working. I mean, I don't know, especially after coronavirus, a lot of things are
Mm-hmm.
closing down.
Yeah.
I hope it's not the case. It's amazing. And not to make it too long and not to give away too much, it's basically a play. It's based on Macbeth from Shakespeare, and it's an interactive play. So what that means is you're not sitting down in your seat watching a play on the stage. You are walking around throughout the play the entire time. And the play is not on one stage. The play takes place in a three-story building that has completely been changed into sets and rooms where you can touch and feel and experience everything. And
Mm-hmm.
you're in there for like 3 hours. And you can follow the actors who are acting out the play, or you can go on your own and do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And all the spectators are wearing a white mask, and it gives this sense of like being anonymous and no one's really watching you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just insane. It's
Wow.
like the most different experience
Mm-hmm.
I have ever felt. And then
Yeah.
aside from that, to the more traditional things, MoMA is a great museum and it's more of contemporary art. And the Metropolitan, which has a contemporary part, but the Metropolitan, the Met, is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And the Guggenheim and the Whitney, all these museums are great, but
Mm-hmm.
those are like the main ones. And then aside from that, you have a billion different galleries that you can visit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all great. And then aside from that, you have Broadway and off Broadway and all these other small theater companies that have great theater productions. And
Yes.
then aside from that, if you go into the Washington Park, you can go to any park, really Central Park, and there will be a lot of great live musicians playing jazz and fusion and any
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing that you can imagine. And then there's a lot of bars, and there's the BB King bar with like a lot of great shows. There's Fat Cat, which is a great little pub that you can play ping pong and chess and games and drink a beer and watch live jazz and rock and roll. There's
Mm-hmm.
like so many different
Yeah.
things in New York that work. They will get these crazy ideas that don't really work in a lot of other countries because people don't go there, so they shut down. So I went to a store that was a cafe, kind of like a Starbucks, but way like more like traditional and cool.
Mm-hmm.
And when you walk in there, ask for your coffee or whatever you want. You can eat something. there's like the walls are completely covered and full with like board games. So you could play chess, you could play Monopoly, you could play
Mm-hmm.
War, you could play any game that you can imagine, and you can sit down with your friends and order some coffee and eat some food and play games,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so different, and there's like
Yeah.
live music on these cassettes that you can go there like a jukebox and play them. There's like so many
Wow.
different things in New York, and so I
Mm-hmm.
think that would be my number one pick.
So in United
Toronto
States
has a lot of art.
would be New York, United States, and talking about in Europe, what would be the place to, or the city, let's say like the city to visit in Europe?
So if I think I would say London was probably where I saw most contemporary art.
Mm-hmm.
The Tate Modern is amazing. It's huge.
Yeah.
There's a National Gallery. There's a Natural Museum. There's a lot, and then there's like White Cube. There's so many great galleries in London. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing as well. And you have to do your research because there are also a lot of great private collections that they're not necessarily museums. So you might not, they're not as advertised. You have to kind of figure out where they are and get in contact to go make a visitation, because
Mm-hmm.
they are open to public a lot of times.
Yeah.
But it's not like as easy to know of or find like a museum.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
London, and then aside all of Europe, man, Europe is amazing.
Yeah.
Berlin, I guess it's kind of the same. It's
Yeah.
just that in London, I think I had more time to go see more things,
Mm-hmm.
and they also have a great theater scene. I went to see War Horse, and I saw Phantom of the Opera. I saw like a lot of great plays in London.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
of course, Paris. Of course, like if you're more into historical art or contemporary art, you might go one way or the other. But Paris is amazing. Warsaw had a lot of great shows in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go wrong.
Yeah.
It's amazing because
Yeah.
Europe has so much history, and there's like great collections, and even throughout Spain, all of Spain, like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of architecture, a lot of churches. So I would walk into any random church, and there would be a Caravaggio painting, and I'll be like, "Wow, this is amazing!" I'm
Yeah.
standing in front of a Caravaggio.
Yeah.
And in Italy, it's like that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Tintorettos everywhere you look. Like so many great Italian painters everywhere you go.
Uh-huh.
It's pretty breathtaking.
Yeah.
Like when you go to Piazza San Marco in Venice, it's ridiculous the amount of paintings that you see,
Mm-hmm.
frescoes, and so it's amazing. And then the biennales are amazing. So Venice Biennale, like you should go to those if you really like
Mm-hmm.
art. Madrid has a lot of good art. I never had the chance to go, but I know
Mm-hmm.
it has a lot of great things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would look into like these main cities and do
Mm-hmm.
your research depending on what you like more.
All right. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. And yeah, I think it. I mean, I think I have the feeling that we still have a lot to talk about this topic, and it's interesting
Yeah, for
actually
sure.
because when we talk about art, it goes into a lot of different directions. And one of the things that I saw here that we didn't have an opportunity to go into this part of the art, and maybe I think it could be in different um, different talk. Actually, we can do it in another one because it's going to
Sure.
music. I saw that a lot of people ask questions about specifically about music, and I saw here, for example, Dennis just asked a lot of questions about music, and we didn't have an opportunity to go into that. So I think it would be
Hmm.
interesting for us to go into music in another topic, go into the American music and what this the impact of the music in general in the culture. I think we could do one next topic about talk about this. What do you think?
I think it's amazing. I try to touch a little bit upon all these different aspects of art, but of course, it's so much.
Yeah.
There's art history, art culture, art artists. There's the art market. How does that work?
Hmm.
Art collection, art fairs,
Yeah.
music, theater, painting, sculpture. It's just a lot.
It's
So I
just a lot.
agree.
Yeah.
I think we could do another talk. We could talk
Yes.
more about music. Yeah, I'm not a musician, but it is a great point of interest for me and for everyone. So I think
Hmm.
it would be cool. And
Yeah.
maybe we could do a talk, maybe in the same one or another one, whenever you guys want. Um, just let me know. I'd love to do these, so I'm okay with doing these whenever.
Yeah. We could.
But we could do something maybe where I talk less randomly, like I have been, and maybe I'll just focus more on answering questions. What do you think? Because I know there's always a lot of questions. We don't get around to answering all of them. And I get carried away, so I'll talk for too long. Maybe we could focus more on answering some questions.
That would be nice. I think that would be very nice. And I would like to ask, guys, if you have any questions or any ideas of topics about arts in general, just make sure to put here in the comments or comment in the video after this. And we will definitely go into that, we'll do a research and do one of more of those live sessions. We definitely go into music that because I saw that we have a lot of interest into music, but we have more like paintings and a lot of different things. So if you have anything that you want to know, just put it here in the comments and let us know, because we'll definitely discuss and bring this topic into for you guys. Okay, and I would like to finish that. So Gui, thank you very much for your time one more time. It was an amazing session. I think people enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed, so I learned a lot. So thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing this much with us. And I hope we can do it one more very soon.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, everyone at home watching, sending questions. This hour goes by very quickly. It's hard to answer all the questions. It's a topic I get very excited about. So if you enjoyed it, if you have more questions, like Tiago said, let us know so that we can save the best ones and maybe we'll get into them in the next talk. And yeah, I think this is a topic that we can explore a lot. So thank you very much, Tiago. Thank you very much again for the opportunity. And thank you everyone for participating at home.
That's nice. That's nice. So guys, thank you very much. Gracias a todos por estar aquí. And see you guys soon. So see you next week. And hope you enjoyed. Hope you like it. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye, guys. See you soon.
Bye. See you soon, Tiago. Take care.
E